Just a few hours ago, American contractors were wounded by Hamas as they attacked an aid distribution point in the Gaza Strip. So here's what we know so far. Now, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a nonprofit based out of the United States. They have the support of, although they're not a part of, the United States and Israeli government. Just recently, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has applied for additional funding so they can continue to provide humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people. Now, we know the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has American personnel on the ground, as is the case here with security personnel and running operations. They also employ people from across the region and around the world. Now, something to keep in mind as we move through this is what, if any, impact will this have on the United States' desire to continue supporting Israel, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or anything else tied to those two. Now, the statement from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation earlier today said, quote, "This morning, 2 American aid workers were injured in a targeted terrorist attack during food distribution activities in Khan Yunis. The attack, which preliminary information indicates was carried out by 2 assailants who threw 2 grenades at the Americans, occurred at the conclusion of an otherwise successful distribution in which thousands of Gazans safely received food. No local aid workers or civilians were harmed. The injured Americans are receiving medical treatment and are in stable condition. We are grateful their injuries are not life-threatening and ask the public to keep them and their families in your thoughts and prayers." My understanding is the cordon here is the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, kind of secure the outer perimeter, and then the inner area where they're actually handing out the aid is where the security personnel from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation are set up. They say GHF has repeatedly warned of credible threats from Hamas, including explicit plans to target American personnel, Palestinian aid workers, and the civilians who rely on our sites for food. Today's attack tragically affirms those warnings. Despite this violence, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation remains fully committed to its mission, feeding the people of Gaza safely, directly, and at scale. Attempts to disrupt this life-saving work will only deepen the crisis. We will continue to stand with the people of Gaza and do everything in our power to deliver the aid they so urgently need. And a note from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is that just as of yesterday, or maybe July 3rd, so 2 days ago, they have so far distributed over 60 million meals inside of the Gaza Strip. So no doubt there's a significant need there, and whether or not GHF is the perfect solution, they are doing something. They're moving the ball in the right direction in terms of providing life-saving aid to much of the population. Now, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation went on to release this picture here showing the fragments of a grenade packed with ball bearings, one of 2 that were thrown by Hamas at American aid workers earlier today delivering food in Gaza. They say the men who threw them then ran into a crowd of civilians. This is what those trying to feed civilians now face for the world to see. I would assume that in this case, the goal of, we can't necessarily say for certain that it was Hamas versus some other militant group. So militant group, terrorist organization is the term being utilized here. And of course, nobody's going to claim responsibility for this. But I would be surprised if the goal here was not to entice or kind of force the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation security and or the IDF to open fire on those 2 fleeing militants in the hope that that there's collateral damage and that Palestinians are killed, and that will then support the PR effort for Hamas, which is happening right amidst ongoing ceasefire negotiations that we'll get to here in a moment. Now, amidst all of this, the IDF is continuing to carry out operations across the Gaza Strip. We've got a fair amount of footage and pictures. They're just kind of on the offensive everywhere, from the northern strip to the central portion, all the way down south, Khan Yunis and Rafah. They say over the past week, IDF troops have been operated in the Gaza City area, demolishing weapons storage facilities and eliminating terrorists both above and below ground. Over the past day, several explosive devices planted to target IDF troops were located and demolished. And for what it's worth, it does seem like we're seeing a significant uptick in IED, improvised explosive devices, attacks. And we've got a video of Palestinian Islamic Jihad carrying some of those out here in a moment, but also a lot of finds and detonations by the IDF. So more than small arms fire right now, we're definitely seeing an increase in what are very effective improvised explosive device attacks. Israel says over the past day, the Israeli Air Force struck approximately 150 targets throughout the Gaza Strip, including terrorists, underground routes, military structures, weapons, sniper posts, and additional terror infrastructure sites. Now, they did mention a fair number of high-value targets eliminated this last week as well. The IDF says troops under their southern command eliminated more than 100 terrorists, including the head of the combat support staff in Hamas's military wing, Hakam Issa, a commander in the Han Yunis Brigade's operations department, Mohammed al-Sheikh, a company commander in the Zaytun Battalion, Isa Abbas, and a company commander in the Sabra Battalion, Mohammed Jarasha. So pretty significant uptick in high-value targets, or at least named targets, being eliminated rather than the low-level fighter that is not necessarily being tracked by name by the IDF. Israel said since the renewal of ground operations in March, the Israeli Air Force has struck over 7,500 terrorist infrastructure sites, including weapons storage facilities, rocket launchers, tunnel networks, and that we got a ton of footage. Every other day, there's more footage coming out of tunnel networks being destroyed. And that's something the IDF is doing in this push into Gaza that they didn't necessarily do the first time around. They're taking more time. They're slowing down, being more deliberate in not just moving through and clearing. They were still clearing a lot of these areas, but now it's slowing down and making sure that every inch underground that could be crossed with a tunnel is destroyed. We've seen concrete poured into some areas. The entire facility caved in other cases, just the entrances and exits destroyed. But nonetheless, a major focus right now on the destruction of that underground infrastructure. And the IDF says that as of today, they have operational control over 65% of the Gaza Strip. So that number continues to increase and does appear to be a part of the Israeli strategy to kind of strangle Hamas as these ceasefire negotiations are ongoing in the background. Not entirely sure they're actually going to play out. I'm going to play this video here that was just released yesterday by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and there's some text on here. I'll kind of give you the summary. Essentially, this was a complex ambush against Israeli vehicles and forces in the Al-Shajaya area. They say this attack took place on July 2nd at 9 a.m., so just a couple days ago. The forces that carried it out, they say, were the elite forces of the Al-Quds Brigade, and they say the details of the operation was detonating a minefield in an enemy vehicle convoy, targeting the cockpit of a tank and houses where enemy soldiers were fortified with shells and engaging in close-range clashes with enemy special forces. According to IDF statements, the result was 2 Israeli soldiers killed and approximately 8 wounded. I've not seen direct corresponding statements like that, but no doubt we have seen an increase in Israeli casualties in Gaza just over the last couple weeks. I want to say more than 20 Israeli soldiers killed since the fighting picked back up in March, which is a notable change and shows that Israel is clearly moving into some areas they hadn't been operating in previously, and there were some tunnels they needed to get into, and as we can see here, there's still some pretty well set ambush locations that Hamas or PIJ is able to carry out. We don't have the aftermath of this strike here. Pretty consistent for a lot of the footage that we get from this side in the conflict. Yeah, definitely something went boom. PIJ is making it appear here as though that was their IED that detonated, likely under that tank is kind of what they're presenting it as. We don't actually get a follow-up clip to see if it hit the tank at all, let alone the destruction or the damage that it may have caused. But we do have more kind of first-person view of the PIJ fighters. Can't be too many of these guys left. It'd be interesting to see at this point, still underground, it'd be interesting at this point to see what the recruiting looks like between Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But Jihad was a much smaller organization at baseline, and especially the top levels of their ranks have just been absolutely crushed by Israel in the last couple of years. So it looks like some RPGs moving down underground. That angle's right. That looks like a nice underground, well-lit underground area, isn't it? I don't think that's where they are right now. Actually got some vests on there. It's not all that common. What was that he just picked up? You see that? Oh, RPGs. The actual warheads. They get into some relatively close-range fights. See, this looks like the same tank they were showing earlier with the IED strike, which makes me a little skeptical as to whether or not this one was actually effective. Something to always keep in mind with any of these attacks, these RPG strikes against tanks. RPGs can do a lot of damage, no doubt, to Israeli vehicles, definitely to dismounted personnel, but Israel also has a pretty significant trophy system that does from what we've seen, the publicly available information, a very, very good job of intercepting those munitions. Close quarters makes it a little harder, but nonetheless, quite often we see a successful interception. And of course, in that case, we don't actually have any footage of the aftermath, so we don't know for sure. This looks like just a rocket, unguided rocket rigged up. God, that's Taliban style there. I know Hamas has done it a fair amount as well, but just rigging up what looks like a 107 millimeter rocket, no real guidance on that. In Afghanistan, we'd see that launched at long range, kind of lobbing it in a general direction. They were trying to hit like an airfield, which is a huge target. I haven't seen them use that frequently in that close of range. I guess it's more likely you're going to actually hit the target, but man, you got to get out of there. So yeah, actually seen some small arms fire in this PIJ clip here. Something we always have to keep in mind when we see this is we never know how recent the footage is. They say this was July 2nd. Unclear, right? And we always get a lot of, they try to make it look like they're engaging helicopters, getting ready to shoot those down, which is why the flares are coming out. I don't know. Since the opening days of the war, we've only seen a few cases where PIJ or Hamas have actually used man pads to try to engage Israeli helicopters. And as far as I'm tracking, not a single one has been shot down. But nonetheless, the fighting is still very much ongoing in the Gaza Strip. Behind the scenes, it sounds like there are ceasefire talks that are ongoing. President Trump just yesterday on Air Force One said there could be a Gaza deal in the next week. And as we get into these details, there's a couple things I think that are worth keeping in mind. First off, Trump wants to make a deal. He wants something to be wrapped up, tie that bow, call it a day, no doubt. And I think we see this in a lot of different areas. It's pretty clear that's not going to happen with Russia and Ukraine anytime soon. But you can see both with the U.S. engagements with the Houthis and with Iran, in both cases, we said mission accomplished. We did it. Well done, everybody. Let's go on home. And it spurred on some debate about did we actually do everything that needed to be done to say that's complete. So you can see Trump's desire to really want to wrap some of these things up. And it looks like right now he might be shifting some of that focus to Gaza, which there could be a couple different rationales here. There are people making the case that Israel might be interested in wrapping up in Gaza so they can focus more exclusively on Iran. Remember, they've said recently they're going to maintain air superiority, and there have been a lot of explosions in Tehran over the course of the last week since this ceasefire went into effect. Like, nobody's saying anything. Everybody's kind of keeping it under wraps, but an abnormal amount of things going boom in the Iranian capital. And Iranian air defense has strangely been active, like a lot. Like almost every day for the past week, we're getting reports of Iranian air defense shooting at something in the sky. And then a few hours later, there's smoke somewhere in Tehran. So I feel like that war is still very much ongoing. And it's possible that Israel wants to get their hostages out, come up with some clear end state in Gaza, and then focus exclusively on Iran for the medium to long term. Now, in looking at this possible ceasefire in Gaza, on Tuesday, President Trump said that Israel had accepted the necessary conditions for a 60-day ceasefire during which the parties would work to end the war. We've been there before. Get the ceasefire in place. Maybe that leads to, as we'll see here, the exchange of some hostages for some prisoners. Maybe IDF moves around in the Gaza Strip a little bit. Maybe they withdraw entirely. And then that opens the conditions for further talks. They say the plan is believed to include the staggered release of 10 living Israeli hostages by Hamas and the bodies of 18 other hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. 50 hostages are still being held in Gaza, at least 20 of whom are still believed to be alive. The proposal also reportedly says sufficient quantities of aid would enter Gaza immediately with the involvement of the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross. The Palestinian official said Hamas was demanding that aid be distributed exclusively by the UN and that the controversial aid distribution system run by the Israel and U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation end immediately. They say another amendment demanded by Hamas was about Israeli troop withdrawals, according to the Palestinian official. A couple notes there. It's interesting how much more Hamas wants to work with the UN than the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or anyone else. It's interesting that that's a component of their demands here. Also, I've not seen anything about where Israeli forces would go. In previous ceasefires, we've seen, well, they'll move to the outskirts or they'll withdraw from the south. I don't know if that's not in this round of negotiations or if that's going to be phase 2 after the ceasefire is in place. But a key note is Israel for months now has said that they are never going to be giving up some of the territory they're taking in Gaza. That is a buffer zone, so maybe it's not actually in the cards to be negotiated. Now, from the Hamas side here, they put out a statement saying, quote, "The movement has delivered its response to the brotherly mediators, which was characterized by a positive spirit. Hamas is fully prepared, with all seriousness, to immediately enter a new round of negotiations on the mechanism for implementing this framework." A lot of fancy words to say. Overall, kind of looks good. So we'll see. There might actually be some movement here in the next 48 to 72 hours. It sounds like there's a possibility of talks happening like in the next couple days. And I believe that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming to the United States on Monday. Maybe that's the time where Trump wants to put out a big announcement or get Netanyahu to sign his side of the ceasefire deal or something. Remember, they're always looking for kind of big events to highlight things, and that would be pretty significant. So we'll keep an eye on it. But nonetheless, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.